Good morning, everyone. I am still in Georgia, Tbilisi, but today I'm gonna be something very fun. I'm going on a tour to visit the old capital of Georgia, and as well as some like caves and troglodyte dwelling places, and most importantly, the museum of Stalin. Who would have thought? But yeah, they do have a Stalin Museum here in his birthplace, which is called Gori, and that is maybe an hour and a half away from Tbilisi. First time I go outside Tbilisi, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Our first stop that day was Uplistsikhe, an extraordinary ancient rock-hewn town located in eastern Georgia, near the city of Gori. Carved directly into the sandstone cliffs along the banks of the Jvari River, it is one of the oldest inhabited cities in Georgia, with signs of human presence from the late 2nd millennium BC. The complex once served as a major political and religious center, especially during the pre-Christian and early Christian period. At its height, Uplistsikhe was a bustling city, boasting more than 20,000 souls, complete with dwellings, temples, pagan altars, wine cellars, a theater, and even an ancient pharmacy, all interconnected by a sophisticated network of tunnels and streets. It declined in importance after the Christianization of Georgia in the 4th century, as new Christian centers like Mtskheta and Tbilisi rose. Despite this, it continued developing, with its first Christian basilica built in the 6th century. The town regained strategic importance during the Muslim conquest of Tbilisi between the 8th and the 10th centuries. However, it was largely abandoned after Mongol raids in the 14th century, serving only as a temporary refuge in times of conflict. What makes Uplistsikhe unique is its blend of architectural styles from various eras, reflecting the town's long history and cultural transitions, from paganism to Christianity and from tribal rule to centralized monarchy. After leaving Uplistsikhe through a secret tunnel, we continued our journey to Gori, which we reached around an hour later. We took the time to have a traditional Georgian lunch with multiple dishes representative of the local cuisine, before going to the Stalin Museum. It was hard to miss it, with all the people selling Stalin-themed souvenirs next by, as well as the massive statue at the entrance of the museum.
Okay, we are now in Gori, which is the birthplace of Stalin, and we're here like to visit the, can I see it? Stalin Museum, which he created in 1937. So since he really became like the strongman in Russia, Bolshevik Russia. So it's gonna be interesting Let's have a look at Whitehorse.
To be honest, it was definitely one of the weirdest museums I've ever visited. The exhibition was entirely dedicated to glorifying the life of Stalin, from his childhood in Gori, when he was still known as Joseph Vissarionis Ggeorgiashvili, to his entry into the Communist Party and his eventual rise to power. The entire museum painted an exalted and heroic narrative of his life, with a particular focus on his role during World War II. Notably absent, however, was any mention of the darker chapters of the Stalinist regime, or the atrocities committed under his rule. It was a striking example of Soviet propaganda, and the intense cult of personality Stalin built around himself. This glorification was even more obvious in the section dedicated to his death, where one of the 12 mortuary masks made of the Soviet leader was proudly displayed. It was, to say the least, unsettling. The museum also featured a large collection of original documents, along with countless portraits, paintings, and statues of Stalin. One curious fact I learned during the visit is that, much like Hitler, Stalin was a failed artist. Before he became responsible for millions of deaths, he published poetry under the pseudonym Soselo. His poems focus on themes like patriotism and nature, and they were even part of Georgian school curricula until fairly recently. Ironically, it made me wonder, if people had been more supportive of aspiring artists in the 20th century, could we have avoided so many horrors? Just a thought. Jokes aside, the Stalin Museum's exhibition is undoubtedly controversial and problematic, due to its heavily biased and uncritical portrayal of the Soviet leader. That being said, it remains the most popular and profitable museum in the country, drawing a steady stream of foreign tourists every year. I was genuinely surprised to see the museum openly selling all kinds of Stalin-themed merchandise, something that would be absolutely unthinkable elsewhere. Imagine buying a t-shirt with Hitler's face on it. Simply unimaginable. Proposals to transform the museum have been floated over the years. Historians suggested the idea of creating an exhibition about the exhibition, an approach that would expose and critically analyze the many distortions and omissions in the museum's original Soviet-era narrative. Additionally, a broader effort was made to confront Georgia's Soviet past following the aftermath of the 2008 South Ossetia War. The Minister of Culture announced plans to transform the Stalin Museum into the Museum of Russian Aggression, and in a bold and symbolic move, a banner was placed at the entrance of the museum declaring, "This museum is a falsification of history. It is a typical example of Soviet propaganda, and it attempts to legitimize the bloodiest regime in history." However, the banner was quietly removed by 2017, reflecting the deep divisions in public opinion regarding this difficult past. Indeed, the Stalin Museum remains one of the most controversial sites in Georgia, and among locals in Gori, there are mixed feelings about Stalin's legacy. Some older generations still view him with a degree of pride, seeing him as a figure who brought strength and global influence to a small Georgian nation. For others, Particularly among younger and more Western-oriented Georgians, Stalin is seen primarily as a dictator, responsible for mass repression, terror, and the destruction of millions of lives. Next to the museum, on a square, we visited another famous Stalin place, his childhood house. Enshrined in a Greek-influenced pavilion stood a small wooden house where Stalin was born in 1878 and where he spent the first 4 years of his life. The modest building had 2 rooms on the ground floor. Stalin's father, a local shoemaker, rented the room on the left and operated his workshop in the basement. Originally, this house was just one among many similar dwellings that formed a working-class neighborhood in Gori, a maze of small homes lining narrow, dusty streets. But during the Soviet period, most of the surrounding buildings were demolished. Only Stalin's childhood home was preserved, carefully protected, transforming it into a symbolic shrine to his early life and roots. It was a distinct example of the personality cult that Stalin created around himself. Standing to one side of the museum is Stalin's personal railway carriage. The carriage, a heavy green-painted Pullman car, is fully armor-plated and weighs an impressive 83 tons. From 1841 onward, Stalin used this specially reinforced train for his travels, preferring it over air travel due to his fear of flying. The carriage accompanied him to several key events of World War II, including the Yalta and Tehran conferences, where major decisions about the post-war world were made. Inside, it is outfitted with a private office, a bedroom, and a bath, reflecting Stalin's desire for both security and a degree of personal comfort on the move. After decades of disuse, the carriage was recovered from the railway yards and transported to Gori in 1985, where it now stands as a part of the museum's permanent exhibition. Once we were finished visiting the museum, we got back in the bus and started driving back towards Tbilisi, and our last stop for the day, the city of Mtskheta, the old capital of Georgia. Mtskheta is one of Georgia's most ancient and spiritually significant cities. Located just 20 kilometers north of Tbilisi, at the confluence of the Aragvi and Jvari rivers. Often referred to as the spiritual heart of Georgia, Mtskheta was the country's capital until the 5th century and remains a sacred place where Christianity first took root in the Georgian kingdom in the early 4th century. The city is renowned for its beautifully preserved early Christian architecture and is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
That's for sure very interesting. We've arrived to Mtskheta, which is the former capital of Georgia. And we're just wandering in the city and then going to see like the main church, which is the main attraction in the town, like a very nice church.
Svetitskhoveli Cathedral in the heart of Mtskheta is one of the most important and venerated churches of the Georgian Orthodox Church. Built in the early 11th century, the current structure stands on a site that has been sacred since the early 4th century. According to the legend, the Christ's robe is located under the cathedral. The Chronicles of Kartli recount some Jews witnessing the crucifixion of the Christ in Jerusalem. They managed to bribe the Roman soldiers to bring back the Christ's seamless tunic back with them to Mtskheta, where it was buried. Though Mtskheta ceased to be the capital in the 6th century, it continued as the coronation and burial site for Georgian monarchs and remains the spiritual center of the Georgian Orthodox Church today. Even though the cathedral largely retains its 11th century structure, most of the original wall paintings from the 11th and 12th centuries have not survived. Only faint traces remain. Indeed, during the 19th century, under Russian rule, and following the end of Georgia's monarchy and church independence, annexes were demolished and interior frescoes were whitewashed. Restoration efforts in the mid-20th century attempted to uncover these artworks, but many were permanently lost. Only fragments, mainly from the 17th century, now remain in some interior sections. Despite this, the inside of the cathedral was very striking and worth a look. One fun thing I noticed in Mtskheta is how popular it was for religious marriages. While we were visiting the cathedral, we saw several couples going through the ceremony, one after another. It made for cool videos, and I could understand why couples would pick this place for this special day. It was a beautiful church with a strong cultural and religious significance for the country. After visiting the cathedral, we still had one last landmark to check out in Mtskheta before going back to Tbilisi, the Jvari Monastery, a beautiful building looming over the city from a hill, only a few minutes away from the city center. One of Mtsketa's crowning jewels is the Jvari Monastery, a masterpiece of early medieval Georgian architecture. Perched dramatically on a rocky hilltop overlooking Mtskheta, Jvari, which means cross in Georgian, was built in the late 6th or early 7th century, on the site where Saint Nino, the woman credited with bringing Christianity to Georgia, is said to have erected the wooden cross. The view from there was beautiful, especially with the sunset colors painting the whole landscape.
Hey, so we are at the last stop of the tour. So we went to this monastery. That is the first church, Christian church, that was built in Georgia. And well, not the original one, but that's the site, and that's also one of the most beautiful view I've seen. You see the old capital of Georgia from there, with like two rivers turning into one, merging into one. So it's very beautiful.
Well, I really enjoyed this tour. It was super great. I will put like the details of the company that organized it if you want to do the same. And otherwise, I wish you a great evening, and I see you in the next video that should come here very soon. Tschüss!